Hello and welcome. I'm Brendan, and today we are going to be playing some Democracy 3 for Honors 232. Today I decided to choose Democracy 3 because Democracy 3 is a game about creating policy. And you basically play as the leader of a country, and you get to craft policies that can either help or hinder the country. And I thought it'd be a great way to try and play the game with the idea of getting sustainable policies in mind. So my goals for this is to basically push out sustainable policy and create sustainable policy and see the kind of effects it has on this simulation, because this is a simulation game. But more specifically, I'm trying to go for 2 awards in the game. So there's 2 achievements you can get. The first one is called Green Utopia. So that's basically having a country that's green and pleasant and it's free from pollution, waste, and damage to the climate. And then the second one is called the Kyoto Award. So that one, I believe, is for keeping your CO2 emissions below a certain level for a certain amount of time. That's when you'll unlock the achievement. So why don't we get started? So I'm going to start a new game, and I'm going to play as the United States. Here's our new job. We're now the president of the country, all 316 lives at the time of this game was made. So currently our GDP is, it could be better. Our health is pretty poor. Our education is decent. Our poverty is low, but it's not like ideally low. Our crime is high and our unemployment is also kind of high. So let's begin. So you'll notice when we first get in, you'll see a bunch of circles. This is essentially the game. This is what the game looks like. Each circle is a policy or an issue. So red ones are like situations that develops. For example, we have a situation called vigilante mobs, so it's a negative situation. So red ones are negative, and then green ones are good ones. So we currently have vigilante mobs plaguing our country. And we can see if we were to reduce this blue value down below this green line, it'll go away. So that's the goal. Some other issues we currently have very high pollution. Our pollution is pretty high, and it's also costing us $11 billion a quarter. We also have obesity and asthma. But our asthma is mostly caused from pollution. So if we reduce pollution, we'll ultimately reduce the asthma epidemic. So I think our first order of business is to actually try and address pollution. Pollution is one of the big things. So we can see that our current environmental policies and just the overall general environment status is increasing our pollution. So that means we do not have a very healthy environment. As you can see, it's like below half. And we can look at why is that. So our car usage, our GDP, and our air travel are reducing it. And our hybrid cars initiative and pollution controls are increasing it slightly. So we don't have a whole lot of policy in terms of affecting the environment. So I think the first thing to do is to probably, in order to address pollution, we have to address the underlying issue, which is the environment. So let's go take a look at our policies and what we can do. So here's a list of our policies, and here's each tab. So we have foreign policy, welfare, economy, tax, public services, law and order, and transport. So I think transport will definitely be a big thing when it comes to generating the pollution. So if we can look at ways to combat that. So maybe, for example, we could reduce car usage or reduce the number of reduce the amount of pollution generated by cars. For example, we could set a car emission limit so that cars can only output a certain amount. So we'll see. For this policy, there's like a slider of how much you can have the policy have effect on. So if we have it with maximum effect, you can see that it will make motorists slightly unhappy, but it'll increase environmentalist opinions, and it'll also increase the environment by a lot, and it'll decrease car usage and CO2 emissions. So I think setting this to maximum will be good. It'll cost us about $2 billion a quarter. But I think that's something that we have to do in order to combat the pollution. Otherwise, the negative effects of pollution, I mean, you can see already in our graph that pollution is costing us $11 billion. So if we spend $2 billion, we'll save $11 billion. So that's a pretty good deal to me. So we still have 2 political powers. So I wonder if there's anything else we can work on. Oh, we can do a clean energy subsidies to pay people to use clean energy. So this will cost us $19 billion a quarter from the maximum effect. But it will increase the environmentalists' opinions, decrease capitalists, but it'll increase the environment and energy efficiency, which is a very important factor, and decrease CO2 emissions at the same time. So I think, do we want to set it to maximum? Yeah, I mean, we might as well go all out. Like, if we're going to make a green utopia, then we should really strive for that. Alright, so we're out of political capital. So let's just end our turn. So the way the game takes, it goes in series of turns, and each turn is a quarter of your total, like, of a year. Okay, so our credit rating was downgraded, which is not ideal. And we only are polling at 17%. So we're going to have to, if we want to be reelected, we're going to have to, like, increase our polling numbers. Our crime went up and our GDP went down. So not much else changed. So our policies didn't do a whole lot of effect in terms of that. But if we take a look at our pollution, we can see it started to go down slightly because of my effect on because our environment went up. So that's good. So we can keep doing that. So the first thing we should probably implement next to help reduce our pollution is telecommuting. Now, encouraging people to work from home is probably one of the best ways to reduce the car usage. Because the more people that work from home, the more people that won't use a car. And we've seen, especially in the current times of the COVID-19 pandemic, with everybody working from home, we've been able to actually see the effects of reduced cars. For example, there was an article that I saw, that I read, where there's like the air quality in Los Angeles has increased so much that you could literally see the entire like Los Angeles city, because before there was just so much smog that you couldn't see anything. And that's we've been seeing that in major cities around the country and around the world too, is that with everybody being forced to stay at home, the air quality has dramatically increased. I think the next thing we should probably do is do something in terms of, we can do a green electronics initiative. This will help us reduce the electronic waste and encourage like a recycling and cleaner mining projects for creating electronics, because there's so much electronic waste that's produced that we don't actually deal with. So I think encouraging a cycling campaign will also be very beneficial. This will increase our health and decrease car, rail, and bus usage. So overall, I think it's a very good policy to enact. So we could do a city farms. It's estimated that it has 100% popularity of the voters, so apparently a lot of people like it. So yeah, why don't we do that? So this will cost us about 1.7 billion just at medium, and maximum will cost us about 2.6 billion. So I don't know if we need exactly to pay 2.6. I think if we leave it at medium, it'll be fine, because we're going to increase the farmers and the farmers membership as well. All right, so with 3 points, there's not a whole lot we can do. I mean, we can implement community policing. This will just be good on helping fight violent crime and decreasing unemployment. All right, so that only costed 1 point, so we have 2 left. You know what? I think keeping the country tidy campaign, because if we reduce the use, we don't want people to litter, and if we encourage people to throw away or recycle their trash, then they're not going to litter it and just hurt the environment. Because there's been cases where like rivers or whole ecosystems have just been polluted with trash, and it makes it almost unlivable for some of the organisms that reside there. So I think this will be really good. And we're out of political power, so we'll just end our turn. Alright, so we have a pretty big issue. So street gangs has recently just developed, and our crime is now at basically max, and our polling has gone down. So this is not ideal. And also in the game, from time to time there'll be decisions that you have to make. So for example, this one is ban alcohol adverts. These don't matter a whole lot in terms of like their effects. I haven't seen them do drastic effects, but for this one, we'll just approve the ban. Um, all right, so crime. So we need to fix our crime issue and our unemployment because having high unemployment encourages low health. So how can we implement a policy to reduce unemployment while also staying sustainable? Maybe we'll implement a smart meter program. It's like one of the things that a lot of people I don't think realize is how like some little things can make a big impact. For example, smart meters, like just installing smarter meters that are more efficient and are able to efficiently manage and monitor your like energy use and energy supply can go a very long way in increasing your overall efficiency of your household and increasing the efficiency of the energy produced as well. We have a hybrid cars initiative. It's currently at low, so I think if we increase that higher, that'll really help us. Or we could do clean fuel subsidies to encourage pay people to switch to clean fuels. And then the last thing we can do is carpooling campaign. That'll just help us with our it costs $1.4 billion a quarter though. I don't know if I want to spend that much. I think we'll just spend $1 billion. So that was all we had for our turn, so we'll just go on to the next one. Okay, so we have some pretty bad news. So our priceless art has been stolen, and our credit rating has also been downgraded. So this has caused our GDP to go down, but our health has gone up. Our crime and unemployment is still really high, and we're actually polling lower than we were before. Another thing we can probably implement is fuel efficiency standards. So if we set like saying cars must have a miles per gallon of X amount, then that'll basically encourage corporations and to develop cars and technologies that can achieve that standard, and we won't consume as much fuel. All right, so 9 political power. Let's see what else we can do. I think free eye tests will be really good for our health. That'll definitely help on combating obesity. We have 1 political power. I don't think we can do a whole lot with that, so I think it's probably best if we just end our turn. Alright, so some good news and some bad news. Our GDP and our health have both gone up, so that's good news. Bad news is crime has gone crime has gone down, but we have ghettos that have developed, so ghettos are not helping the crime, and most of that's caused by vigilante mobs and street gangs. So if we were to get rid of vigilante mobs, then we could reduce ghettos. We'll look into that later, but right now we're polling at 19%, so that's higher than that's pretty good. That's higher than last time, and we currently have debt protection law. I'm just going to limit the agency. But another thing we can implement is electric cars. We could encourage the use of electric cars, and supposedly it's 100% popular with the popularity of others is 100%. Now we could do just outright ban gas-powered cars, or we could just do only taxis, or maybe just public transport. Well, do we want to do taxis or just outright ban? Well, we're trying to push our green New Deal essentially. So why don't we just go for outright ban gas-powered cars? And we'll see what kind of effects that has. We could probably encourage organic farming. And organic farming will help reduce the number of chemicals that we put in it. And like chemicals may have negative health effects. And so with just using organic farming, will drastically increase. And you can see it'll decrease obesity as well. So it's a good policy as well. Another thing we could probably do is, we could do a health food subsidies. So if we provide incentives to purchasing healthy food, such as like food stamps or no taxes on certain like healthy food, that'll encourage people to buy more of that and eat and consume more, and that'll make us and that'll make people healthier overall. And we can see this will have a drastic effect on obesity. All right, so we only have 1 point, so there's not a whole lot else we can do. Let's check in on our pollution. Oh, so we can see that our pollution is almost below the line for it to go away. So I think by next turn or the turn after, it should be gone. And I was right, we can see that pollution and uncompetitive economy are both at an end, so that's really good. And also, another good news, our GDP, health, unemployment, and crime all went down. And we're also polling at 30%. It's a record for our current administration. Now, we do have a policy. Now, here's a big one, GM food proposal. So, it says a large number of agricultural companies are interested in growing genetically modified food in our soil. Some food can be genetically manipulated to allow for longer shelf life and both disease and herbicide resistances. However, opponents are concerned about the potential risks associated with altering the food chain. So now here's a big issue. We could choose to allow GM crops or ban the sale of GM food. So this is one of the issues that's like that makes real policy and real world policy hard, because there's a lot of factors that go into certain topics and issues. For example, GM crops. There's a lot of different factors that influence how GM crops operate, and making a decision on that can drastically hinder or reduce the effect of certain other benefits of it. So, for example, we could ban the sale of GM food. However, it might decrease our food production yield and our food price and everything. Or we could choose to allow it. So we could do that. I think personally, if we allow it, because they have huge potential benefits, and as long as if we make sure to like regulate it enough so that we don't like go overboard on GM and maybe just use genetically modified to increase like resistances to diseases and yields, that might be better. So I think we'll just allow it for right now. All right, so crime is still high, but our pollution's down, so it's really good. So now you can see our pollution is basically non-existent on the economy screen. And now let's take a look at our CO2. So our CO2 emissions are trending downwards, which is really good. Ideally, we want them to be as low as possible. So let's see if there's any other ways we can reduce CO2 emissions. Actually, we could ban low MPG cars. So just an outright ban, or restrictions or fines. I think doing an outright ban would be best, because we already set like efficiency limits, so they have to comply with that. And if we just ban the rest, that'll encourage people to swap over to higher efficiency cars. All right, so we have 3 points. I will implement, well, there's not a whole lot else we can do in terms of sustainable. So let's look at any policies we currently have enacted and see if we can change those or modify them so that they're better. So we have pollution controls. So this will be one of the big things. I think setting like a pollution control is really important in terms of managing the country's pollution level. For example, there's been proposals of instituting a cap and trade system, whereby you set a ceiling on the total number of emissions that the country can produce, and then you issue permits to corporations or other people to produce like a set amount of like CO2 emissions, basically. And the corporations the corporations basically have to buy and sell permits between them if they want to like produce more. So if a factory doesn't produce enough or produces less than what their permit offers, they can sell the rest of their permit to another corporation, and then that corporation can produce more. But overall, the system would make it so that there's the total number of pollution would not go above a certain amount. And so I think implementing that might be a good idea, implementing some sort of pollution control in terms of our country. So we could do like set governmental targets, we could do restrictions and fines, or we could do major fines. I think major fines are the best motivator to getting corporations to actually comply. Alright, so that took all of our political capital, so we don't have a whole lot left. So I guess we'll just end our turn. Alright, so we have some good news. Our antisocial behavior is at an end, our health gone up, and our crime and unemployment are down. We also have a superhero as well, so that's pretty good. And we're polling at 39%, so we're almost at the halfway. I think maybe setting eco-home regulations would be good, to encourage houses to become more sustainable and more eco-friendly. We could encourage new car subsidies. So, we just banned low MPG cars. So, but the issue is people that have these low MPG cars and may not have enough money to buy a new one that's more efficient. We could implement subsidies to incentivize people to buy new ones and give them some money to help out. So this will help us. It'll actually decrease our asthma epidemic because the cars are more efficient and produce less. Alright, so we have 2 points left. So I think encouraging the youth is really strong. We've seen like youth such as Greta Thunberg being very vocal and active in raising awareness about climate change, because ultimately they're going to be the ones that are going to be around when more severe effects are going to happen, and our children and our children's children will be around. And so I think encouraging the youth to participate in politics and take up issues is a very important factor when it comes to mitigating climate change, and at least raising awareness about it. So if we encourage all the youth. So we're out of points for this term. And hey, look at that. We have vigilante mobs is now at an end. So that's really good. And our health is still going up. Crime's still going down. One of the other things we can probably focus on is also education. Education is a very important thing, because if we raise more awareness about issues, especially climate change, that'll encourage more people to want to take action, or at least mitigate some of their personal effects. Our education could be higher, and I think supporting like state schools and technology colleges will help with that. So right now we're at shared textbooks. Now we could do modern textbooks, or just go straight to student laptops. So I think going straight to student laptops, if we have the most modern equipment, because like textbooks are only so up to date. They're only so up to date for a certain amount of time, and then once new information gets published that contradicts that, then the textbook has gone to waste, and you basically wasted like paper. So I think just going for student laptops and allowing people to like look up the information. We could help work on science funding, maybe. I think encouraging science funding will allow us to, like it says here, it'll affect energy efficiency positively. So it allows us to develop new technologies for climate mitigation. And also, who doesn't like particle accelerators? Alright, so we only have 1 point, so I think that's time that we end our turn. Alright, so we're actually doing pretty well. Our street gangs is not at end, so that's really good. We have a decision, freedom of information. I think freedom of information is pretty good. People should have a right to know. Our health has gone up, our education has gone up, and our crime is looking good. It's in the green now. We still have pretty high unemployment, and our poverty is not ideal. And we're also polling at 47%, so we're getting pretty close to good polling numbers. And we're about halfway through our term. So let's see if we can address some other issues. Technology grants. Now that's an interesting one. So we can basically provide incentives to businesses to invest in new technologies. So if we provide an incentive to investing in new climate change technology, maybe that'll help us. That'll work out a lot better. And you can see our technology and our productivity will all go up. So I think it's a good option. Alright, so we have 1 point left. So I think we can't do much, so we'll just end our turn. Okay, so a few issues. We have a stress epidemic, which is not ideal. But our education went down slightly, and our health went up though. But our asthma epidemic's at an end, so that's good. Our credit rating, however, was downgraded, so that means our deficit will be greater. But in good news, we are polling at 58%, so we're actually, our country's not doing too bad. So let's see if we can implement some more sustainable Green Deal type things. Oh, you know, the best way is to just do a straight climate change adaptation fund. Just directly invest in a long-term prediction system. This will cost us a lot, but I mean, ultimately, sure, the upfront cost may be massive, but we'll save a lot more money and human lives in the long term if we invest in mitigating the effects today. So this is a very good idea. I think for now we'll just end our turn. Okay, so our poverty went down and our health went up, so that's really good. We are polling at 61%, so we're actually doing really well. Now here's a decision. So power lines. Angry citizens are protesting against a project to build power lines through their villages. Village is, yeah. These power lines are necessary to further increase use of the renewable energy sources. Not building them would be an economic setback. However, if you ignore the citizens, it'll make them angrier and supportive of their cause. So this is another big problem when it comes to creating policies, and especially like climate change policies, is that you're building, like if you build infrastructure for renewable energy sources, you might be hurting other people that live near that infrastructure. And in this case, like, we could choose to build the power lines, but to access the more renewable energy sources, but we could be destroying somebody's village or destroying people's houses and hurting their overall well-being. And so there's this really big trade-off when deciding whether you want to enact this policy or creating policies, is you have to analyze the trade-offs, and if it's not something you would be okay with, then you might not want to do it. So for this, I don't know, should we build a power line or stop construction? So I think stopping construction, like it says, there are alternative ways to build this. Like, you could do underground power lines, or you could just reroute the power lines around the village. It might cost a little more, but you'd be saving the village, and you'd also still be getting that access to the energy. So I think stopping the construction would be an ideal, and finding some better way, alternative to implementing it, would be the best option. We currently still have a skilled shortage. And that's not great, because if you don't have access to highly educated and highly skilled people, then we can't put our greatest minds and like our best skills at solving pretty big issues, especially in terms of climate change. So I wonder if there's a way to work on this. I think one of the ways is probably to obviously increase education. So education will go up because of our state schools. We could also fund technology colleges more. I think that's a good idea. We could invest in bus subsidies to encourage people to take public transportation. And I think investing in public libraries to try and get as many people educated as possible will help us. And so that was all our political capital, so we'll just end our turn. Hey, and well, we didn't unlock green Utopia yet, but we unlocked crime-free. So apparently we don't have any crime in our city, in our country. So that's really good. Another good news that we have a high productivity now, so that'll help our GDP as well. We also have obesity is gone. The obesity's gone. That's really good. However, our credit rating was downgraded, so we have an even bigger deficit. But we do get 67% of the vote if we had an election. Let's take a look at our CO2 emissions. Our CO2 emissions have just basically reached the bottom, and so they'll start to bottom out for the next couple turns. Well, let's see if there's anything else we can do. We could implement a vertical farm subsidies to encourage people to plant growth and greenery in skyscrapers and in major cities. That'll also help on traffic congestion as well. Oh, and there we go. We have unlocked Green Utopia. So we have truly made this country a green and pleasant land, free from the horrors of pollution, waste, and damage to the climate. We and the people, planet, thank you. So we unlocked one of our 2 achievements. And we also won an aerospace contracts, which increases our decreases our unemployment and increases our GDP. That's really good. And we have record polling numbers. We're polling at 73%. Wow. So the country is looking up right now. We still have decently high unemployment. So let's see if we can fix that. So let's see. I bet if we encourage our unemployment benefit, if we increase that to like medium or something. If we can implement a microgeneration grant, so we could help subsidize people to build solar panels on their house and other small energy sources. Building solar will really help encourage the like sustainable practices, because for a long time, for like past 5 or 10 years, or like 5 or 10 years ago, the price of solar was so expensive that a lot of people couldn't either afford it, or it wasn't worth enough. Like you couldn't pay it back with the amount of energy you generated. But now over time, we've seen that the technology has developed and the cost has come down enough to where you can actually afford it, and it'll pay back itself within like 15 or 20 years. And I think just even providing more incentives for that will dramatically help. So that spent all of our political capital, so we're gonna have to end our turn again. And good news is homelessness is at an end. Our credit rating has been downgraded again, so we're now at a C. That has drastically decreased our deficit, but we're polling at 83%, so that's really good. Is there anything else we can do? We could also provide subsidies for adults to become educated. I think that'll help us. That'll actually directly decrease our skills sources. So if we provide incentives for adults to go back to college or go back to like trade schools or vocational schools, that'll help. So we're at 1 point, so we'll have to end our turn. And we have a few issues. So currently have a message from our minister. He has become kind of unloyal because of our current policies. So he's like, he may resign if we don't like follow his ideas or his like wants. We have alcohol abuse is now an end. However, our debt crisis has skyrocketed because of our new policies have been spending. We've been spending a lot of money on that. So this is going to hurt everybody, capitalists, self-employed, and the GDP. And also we have a doctor strike as well. So we'll have to fix those. But first we have our internet tracking. So I think just banning tracking. And our polls dropped drastically. We now only get 67% of the vote. That's not ideal. So let's see if we can mitigate our doctor strike first. So I think setting some labor laws to make them balanced will be better. We don't have enough political capital for that. We only have 20. We could implement compulsory food labeling. That'll help us to actually have, so people can understand what is in their food that they buy. And that's all we have right now, so we're just going to end our turn to save our points. Alright, so good news is our internet economy has taken off. Our polling went back up, and we don't have a whole lot else. Our GDP has gone down, but our education has gone drastically up, so that's good. We still don't have enough political power. We're one short. So I'm going to have to end my turn again, and then we should have enough now. Oh, but it's actually the election now, so let's see if we win. And it looks like we're winning by a landslide. And we won with 187 million votes. Oh, And look at that. We got our second achievement, the Kyoto Award. So we are we may be members of a small club, but it's an important one. We are proudly one of the few nations that are taking our climate change obligations seriously. And there's a capitalist plot. Okay. So we successfully managed to get the 2 achievements, the Green Utopia and Kyoto Award. But now I want to talk about some things I've learned and some challenges I had while playing the game. So the first thing I should mention is that Democracy 3 isn't a hard game. It's supposed to be easy and it's supposed to be fun, and it's meant as a learning experience. And that's one of the things I think it really excels at, is teaching people how policy works and how policies operate and interact with each other. It's essentially like a spider's web. In the spider's web, you have each strand of silk, and where their intersection point is, you could think of that as a policy or an issue. And they all are interconnected with each other. And when you change one, or when you affect one, it drastically can affect the other ones. And that's a really good analogy between for the policies, because it's like a web of issues essentially. And solving one issue might bring up other problems in different areas. And definitely during the game, I was pushing a very sustainable and environmentally friendly agenda. I was only trying to go for policies and laws that would directly benefit the environment and reduce carbon emissions and reduce pollution. So I didn't really concern myself with the other areas of the law in terms of taxes or foreign policy or unemployment or jobs. I didn't concern myself with that. I was mostly trying to push a specific agenda, and that's not very realistic in terms of the real world. You can't just focus on one thing. You can't think of it as a vacuum, because it's all interconnected so much that just changing one thing or implementing one new policy will drastically change how everything else operates, or how other people will react, or other policies will react. And for example, I banned low MPG cars, and while that's good and will reduce CO2 emissions because there's only now going to be high efficiency cars, the issue you have with that, or one of the drawbacks, is that people that have these low MPG cars, they now can't drive them anymore, and if they don't have the money to buy a new one, they can't do anything. They're basically going to suffer economically, and their economy would suffer. And that's one of the things that I wish Democracy would cover more, is the significant drawbacks for implementing some policies. I mean, sure, it does, like, each policy costs money almost all policies cost some sort of money, and you have like a deficit, and if you have too much deficit, you could go into a debt crisis. But it doesn't really it doesn't really make it very hard in terms of really punishing you for going all out on one specific like policy agenda. And that's something I wish it would have covered more, because in the real world, it's very hard to balance how we solve climate change and while also maintaining our economy is really strong, because we obviously want our economy to grow and we want our economy to be really strong, but we need to fix climate change and we need to solve climate change, and they conflict basically, because right now our economy is based on one where we have a lot of CO2 pollution, for example, either through cars or burning fossil fuels to generate power, or for burning minerals and stuff for manufacturing. That generates a lot of pollution and a lot of CO2. But in order to solve climate change, we need to basically stop polluting and stop producing CO2. And it's a really hard thing to balance, because if we just go all for climate change policy, then we're basically going to be hurting our economy. And if we go straight for the entire just benefiting the economy, the climate change is going to go out of hand and it's going to get worse. And currently, right now, we've seen that we haven't really done a whole lot in terms of mitigating climate change, and we focus more on the economy. And that's coming back to like basically bite us, because climate change is only going to get worse, and we're going to see the effects increase as time goes on. And so I think we need to push more in terms of policy for climate change. But like I said, again, it's a hard thing to balance because there's so many different interconnections between policies, especially in the real world and in Democracy 3, that we have to be careful, and we have to. The more important thing I think we need to do is we need to create smart and effective policies, and we also need to understand the different drawbacks that our policies that we implement will have. And I think another important thing for achieving that is to educate people. One of the important things is raising awareness and educating people about climate change, so that they can help us and advocate for these effective and smart policies. Because ultimately, I think the smart policies are the way to go. And if we don't have smart policies, then we're gonna suffer in other areas. So overall, one of the most important things that I think I learned while playing the game is that it's not very hard to solve climate change, or at least mitigate the effects of it. We have all the tools and resources to do it now, and it's not like we need to wait for some new technological breakthrough that's going to suddenly fix all our issues. No, if we implement smart and effective policies, and if we raise awareness and get people interested, then we can really combat climate change. And the thing is, like, America produces 15% of the world's CO2 emissions. And so just reducing that to even 10% would drastically help even the entire world along with our country. For example, in Democracy 3, I set pollution controls. I made stricter pollution controls, and obviously it didn't go into a whole lot of detail, but I like to think that I instituted like a cap and trade system, for example, or some other type of economic or beneficial system that would significantly cap the amount of pollution we can produce. And you could see that doing that, it had a drastic benefit towards reducing CO2 pollution and CO2 emissions. Our CO2 emissions were down so much that we were able to get the Kyoto Award. In real life, though, the U.S. is a signatory, but they'd never ratified the actual protocols, however. But then we were also able to reduce our pollution at the same time. So it has both really good benefits. And that instituting a cap and trade system, or at least stricter pollution controls, is something every state or every country in the world can do today. For example, California in 2006, they implemented stricter pollution controls, and I believe again in 2016. But then a report published by the Environmental Defense Fund, which is a nonprofit that advocates for environmental issues, they found that California's, as a result of California's 2006 pollution control law, their CO2 emissions actually dropped by 13% since that 2006 law passing. And they found that California per capita, the number of tons of CO2 emissions is 5 times lower than the per capita average in the United States, which is a huge benefit. And if every state did that, we would see such a drastic decrease in CO2 emissions that we could really combat this climate change. And the climate change is only going to get worse. And the longer we delay, just the worse it's going to get. The longer we continue to increase our pollution and increase the amount of CO2 emissions, the more and more compounding effect that the CO2 will have on our atmosphere and have on our environment and society, and even any other organisms as well. Climate change is such a destructive force, and it will only get worse. And but the thing is, if we start working on it today and we start implementing policies today with the tools and resources, we can drastically reduce and get under that 2 degrees, or maybe even, if possible, the 1.5 degrees that the Paris Climate Accords argue for. And it doesn't even have to be big things as well, because sure, one of the drawbacks you could argue is that the policies could cost billions and billions of dollars, but to implement. But the issue is, if we don't do that, then the destructive effects of climate change will cost us billions and billions of dollars in repair, healthcare, economy lost, and our overall GDP will go down. For example, the effects of Hurricane Katrina were billions of dollars in damages. And imagine if we had a Hurricane Katrina every year. That's due to climate change. That's not something that I think the U.S. could afford. We cannot afford to have a billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar hurricane every year. And it's not just hurricanes. We'll also have earthquakes and tornadoes and more extreme weathers that will cause even more destructive to our society and the environment. But besides that, even if big policies aren't as like strongly advocated for, we can even just implement little policies. It's the little things that can make a huge difference. For example, we got here by basically by producing small amounts of CO2 emissions and doing small through industrialization. We were slowly producing CO2 emissions, and then that all has a compounding effect, and that's how we're now where we are today with CO2 amounts reaching over almost 500 parts per million in the atmosphere. And so even if we just implement small policies, for example, in Democracy 3, I implemented a smart meter program where you just replace the meter in everybody's house that can more efficiently monitor energy use and how much you're actually using at specific times, and then the power companies can adjust for that. Just implementing that could save us tons of power, and it will reduce the amount of fossil fuels we need to burn to generate that. Or, for example, providing incentives to building renewable energy sources. While it may not seem like a lot, or installing renewable energy sources in everybody's house, well, it may not seem like putting solar panels on somebody's house is going to be a good benefit, but if enough people put solar panels on their houses, that slowly adds up over time, and it's a compounding effect. And so, just like how we got here with the compounding pollution and CO2 emissions, we can also work to reduce that by building little small policies that will slowly compound, and then eventually we'll be able to have enough of them to where we can combat climate change. And I think that's the thing that we really need to strive for, is those small little policies. If we're unable to enact the big ones. The big ones are definitely important, don't get me wrong. But I think we'll see the most benefit by looking at the little policies and implementing those across each state. And especially if each state implements their own little policies, they'll all build up to create this massive effect that could ultimately solve climate change. But ultimately, if we really want to solve climate change, we need to start working on these policies today. We need to craft these smart and effective policies right now, before it's too late. Thanks for watching.